Looking at our world from a theological perspective. This is the Theology Central Podcast, making theology central.
Good morning, everyone. It is Monday, May the 27th, 2024. It is currently 11:01 a.m. Central Time, and I am coming to you live from the Theology Central studio, located right here in Abilene, Texas. Now, on this podcast, I have turned on this very microphone. I've hit the start streaming button and go live all across the internet to talk about the church, to talk about what's going on in the church, to talk about what's going on in Christianity. In fact, I created an entire podcast series called Eye on Christianity so that we kind of take some time to turn our eyes onto what's going on in the world of Christianity. And that includes what's going on inside of the church, talking about it. And I have raised at least probably over the last maybe 12 to 24 months, maybe over the last 2 years, I've been starting to raise the question more and more. And I probably, maybe even longer than 2 years, probably started somewhere during the pandemic, and then it increased after the pandemic. But I began to raise some questions about the church. And I begin to raise questions about, and I know I'm looking at this from a very pragmatic approach, and I know many people get mad when I do this, but I think it's reasonable to ask some questions. The church as an institution, right? It costs a lot of money to keep these churches operating. No one can deny that, right? The money for salaries, the money for buildings, the money for electricity, the money for upkeep, the money for this, needing this supply, or needing this material and this material. It takes a lot of money to keep a church operating. I mean, if you go to church, just ask for your church's budget and just try to summarize about how much money it takes per year just to keep the church operating, just to keep the church functioning. And then when you look at that number, write it down and then ask yourself, what are you getting from this institution, from this church, in comparison to that number to keep it operating? How many hours of teaching do you get from that church each week? What is the depth of that teaching? What is the quality of that teaching? How sufficient is that teaching? When you go to church, are you getting so much teaching and so much content from your church that you don't even have time to worry about listening to anything else or even thinking about anything else because your church gives you so much? Or is it one of those situations where you go to church, you have some nice friends, you shake hands, you talk about what's going on in their life and your life, you have fun, the church provides you some fun food and activities, you love the activities, you love the people, maybe you love the music, maybe you love the building, whatever. But then most of your spiritual growth happens where? Outside of the church. Outside of a local church. In other words, you're not going to an institution for your spiritual nourishment and growth. You're obtaining it through other means, online, podcasts, other means. Now, I understand this is where it can be complicated because many times you're getting your spiritual food, you're still getting it from a church. So this is kind of the catch-22. You're going to a church and all the money goes to keep that church operating, but you're really getting fed by a different church. Well, then, if you're being fed by a different church, then what is the point of the church you're going to? That you're giving your time to, you're giving your attention to, you're giving your money to, if you're actually being fed and discipled and helped by someone else. So this raises lots of questions, but I think it's fair to say that in many cases, how can I say this without, I know it's going to offend some people. I just don't think some churches are worth the money it takes to keep them open. I know I shouldn't say that, but I just think that's the case. Look, I have asked the listeners of this podcast numerous times, tell me about where you get most of your spiritual food. What helps you grow the most? And almost inevitably, no one said, in fact, I don't think anyone has ever said their local church. It's always, well, if I from this or from this or from this or from this book or these books or from this podcast or this YouTube channel or this or that. And it's always something outside of their local church. Well, then why what's the point of that local church? What's the point of it? If the people attending that local church are actually being fed by something else, then that church's existence should be questioned. Look, if Christians were being fed sufficiently by their local churches, then would there be Christian radio providing hours and hours and hours of teaching? Would there be websites like Sermon Audio? Would there be millions of Christian podcasts? All of that, because there's all of these other things. The Christian publishing world, we can go on and on. All of these other things. Now, I know it's typically, it used to be sold as, we're here to help your church, to support your church, to supplement what your church is giving. But inevitably, I think it's fair to say, no, you're doing more than just, you're doing more than just assisting them. You're doing the full job. I'm getting all of my discipleship, all my spiritual growth from these other sources. So I've raised this question over and over and over. Recently, I reported to you about an article that was published at the Christian Post. They were talking to George Barna, and it was basically saying how the church is Christians and the church is becoming invisible. It's losing its influence. The church is being more influenced by media and the culture than the church is influencing culture and the media, and that all the signs for the church are becoming more and more negative. So I reported on that, right? I reported all of that and, kind of moved on. Well, this morning, I was listening to American Family News from American Family Association, right? American Family Radio, American Family Association is so political. I have negative, feelings about it, but their AFN newscasts, which is delivered as a podcast. It also airs on their radio network, the American Family Radio Network, but it serves as a podcast. And it's released multiple times a day, right? I think maybe 5 or 6 episodes per day, something like that. And they're about 5 minutes long. And they're supposed to be giving news more from a biblical perspective. Sometimes it sounds like they're giving news more from a Republican perspective, but I digress. All right. They're there. So I at least try to listen to it anytime I see it. So I saw one of my podcast apps today, there was a new episode and it was the Memorial Day special. So they were talking about a lot of political things, a lot of things going on. And then at the very end, their final news segment, right, with about 1 minute and 35 seconds left, they report on that report that we reported on from the Christian Post, George Barna, and the state of the church. Now, I'm going to play this for you. The first part of it, I'm like, well, I've already reported all of this. I've already talked about this. We've already walked through all of this. So I don't really have anything to offer. But it's the very end where they, in a sense, offer a solution and how to fix the church. Now, I don't know if it's a solution on how to fix the church or if it's a solution on how to fix people who go to church. That's somewhat, I don't think they had enough time to draw that distinction, but I think it could be interpreted either way. Hey, look, here's all the problem. Here's the issue with all the Christians who actually go to church, right? Here's the problem. Now, here's the solution to fix people. Well, the solution to fix people, I know it's going to be shocking, it doesn't involve the church. And if this is the solution to fix the church, then the solution to fix the church doesn't arise from within the church. It arises from without the church. So then it begins to call into question, what is the purpose of the church anyway? So, and I continue to raise these questions, but just listen to this and see if you can detect it. Are you ready? Here we go.
In final news, Christians have become invisible in the U.S. That's just one of the indictments leveled against the church in an alarming interview with a well-known Christian pollster and worldview expert. AFN Steve Jordahl has this story.
Most of the markers of health for the American church are pointing the wrong way, according to George Barna, Director of Research at the Cultural Research Center, in an interview given to the Christian Post.
People have become more selfish. Churches have become less influential. Pastors have become less Bible-centric. The media now influences the church more than the church influences the media, or the culture for that matter.
He says it doesn't help that many churches are more concerned with the color of the carpet than the souls of their neighbors.
The Christian body tends to get off track arguing about a lot of things that really don't matter.
Barna says shockingly few Christians who attend church regularly have an actual biblical worldview.
Now, just stop right there. I have to interrupt this. I don't want to interrupt it, but I have to interrupt that. Shockingly, most Christians who attend church don't have a biblical worldview. Then what's the point of the church? If the church can't even influence a biblical worldview of the people attending, we need to stop worrying about influencing media or the culture. The church can't even influence the people who regularly attend church. So people who regularly attend church do not have a biblical worldview. Well, shocking, I know. Why? Now, to me, that's not shocking, because I'm going to go back to what I stated in my introduction. I continue to raise the question, is the church actually worth the money it takes to keep it operating? If the church cannot even influence the worldview of the people who attend on a regular basis, then what is the church actually accomplishing with all the money it takes to keep it operating? So, shockingly, most people who attend church on a regular basis, this is not people who don't attend church, this is people who attend church on a regular basis, does not have a biblical worldview. Yeah, somebody needs to sound the alarm.
The same is tragically true of pastors in those churches. He says it's rendered the church impotent.
We've reached a time of Christian invisibility in our culture.
But there is hope, and it starts not in the church, but in the home.
Now wait, there's hope, but it doesn't start in the church, it starts in the home. Okay, I'm sorry, I got to stop here. Now, so you could interpret this way. Is the hope, it doesn't start in the church, it starts in the home. Is the hope that something that happens in the home can fix the church? Or is this like, hey, the church can't do the job, so the hope is what happens in the home can fix the Christians who go to church? So is the solution in how to fix the church, or is the solution how to fix the people? I think this is a solution in how to fix the people. Meaning, the solution to fix the people, even on Christian radio, even George Barna, is not the church. They're literally telling you the way to fix this now moving forward is not coming inside the church. The solution is outside of the church. Ladies and gentlemen, if the solution to fixing the fact that most Christians who attend church does not even have a biblical worldview, if the solution starts in the home and not in the church, then you are literally, what you are arguing is that the church is absolutely irrelevant, and there's no point in spending all of this money keeping it operating. Because we have to go find the solution outside of the church. Now, they're going to say it's in the home. Let's let them articulate this.
Specifically with children.
Worldview development, helping children to develop into spiritual champions for the purpose of becoming cultural transformation agents, understanding that's why we become disciples of Jesus.
I'm Steve Jordahl.
That's all our time for now. Find more news on afn.net.
Did you hear that? So the way to fix this, the way to get people really to be disciples, the way to really get people to be agents of transformation is the home. So, hey, if you go to church, sorry, what you need to realize is the church is not going to do the job for you. If you really want your kids to grow up with a biblical worldview, don't depend on the church. It's going to be on you. It's going to be on you. So then what is the church doing? What is the church doing? What's the purpose of the church? I thought the purpose of the church was to equip saints for the work of ministry so that they're no longer children tossed to and fro with every wind of doctrine. Now, I am not in any way negating the responsibility that takes place in the home. I'm not negating that responsibility or saying it's not there. But what's the point if you're spending all of this money to keep a church operating? You place your kids in their Sunday school classes, in their youth groups. You do all of their activities, whether it's Awana, whether it's this, whether it's church camp, it's this, it's a vacation Bible school, and just think of all the money it takes to keep all of those things operating. All of the money spent on the materials for those Sunday school classrooms. Just think of all of the money, church camps, all the money that goes into that entire industry of young people in the church. A lot of money goes to it, right? A lot of money goes to it. And then you're telling me, no, what? Well, hey, the solution is not here. The solution is in your home. Now, I know everything I'm going to say here is going to be offensive, but that's okay. This is my mentality. So when I moved from Nebraska to Texas, moved back to Texas, because this is where I'm originally from, born and raised, but I left because of the military. The military sent me back. When we got back, we were like, okay, let's find a church. We got to find a good church, right? We're going back to Texas, right? There's a church on every street corner. This should be fun. We're going to have so many to choose from. And after about 6 to 7 months, we were at the end of our proverbial rope. It was like, what has happened? We've entered into the theological wasteland. I mean, it was bad. Okay. But we found a church and we're like, you know what? This church is pretty good. I mean, Sunday school is really good. Sunday morning is really good, all right? So the teaching's good. Wednesday night, not really much there. It's more of kind of like a devotional. And they don't even have a Sunday night service. So you really can't count Wednesday. Sunday night's not even there. So that means there's just Sunday school and Sunday morning. So then I was like, okay. So now as having 2 daughters, I'm like, okay, so how is this going to work? So we go to church on Sunday morning, and they're even, in some cases, they may not even have a Sunday school if something is going on or some special activity. So there's possibility that then it's going to require me to do the teaching for a Sunday night or a Wednesday, right? Or maybe both. So then it was kind of like, well, wait a minute. If I'm going to basically be doing most of the work at home, what's the point of going to that church? And there were plenty of other churches where they didn't have this, or they didn't have this, or they didn't have this. And it's like, well, what's the point? Like, if I'm going to be doing most of the work at home, there's no point in getting in a car, driving to a building, walking into a building that's not even going to be sufficiently doing the job, that I get us back in the car to drive home. So then I do the rest of the work. Well, if I'm doing the rest of the work, there's no point in giving my money to that building and to that institution to try to keep all of this going. That's not even doing the job sufficiently enough. But I thought that was fascinating. They acknowledge all the problems in the church. And one of the big issues is that most people who attend church on a regular basis does not have a Christian worldview. And what was their solution? Oh, it has to happen in the home. Well, then what's the point of going to church? What's the point? I know when I look at it this way that some people get really bothered, but I've always struggled with this. I used to struggle with this when I was in the United States military in Nebraska, right? Work all day. You come home, take off the uniform, like, okay, it's Wednesday night. Time to get ready now to turn around, leave the house, go to a church. Well, I would come home from work, hurry up, rush, get the uniform off. Sometimes have to go even in uniform, get to church. And what would I get when I arrived at church? Maybe a 10 to 15 minute devotional, maybe a little devotional. That was usually, I don't think I can remember one of them. I don't even know if I have any notes to even reflect what even happened during those so-called devotional things. Then maybe we would go around the room and everybody would want to pray for so-and-so, and then there would be some prayer, and then we would go home. And it's like the time to get in the car, drive there and I know that sounds so unspiritual, but I think that, look, if the church is there to equip, if the church is there so that you'll no longer be tossed to and fro with every wind of doctrine, if the church is there for the teaching, proclamation, and discipling of Christians, the proclamation of God's word, the teaching of God's word, for the equipping of Christians and for the discipling of Christians. well, then there's going to have to be a certain level of teaching. There's going to have to be a certain amount of content given. Now, I know the difference is, and maybe this is a personal preference, right? I think some people don't really want all of that content. They really don't. They really don't. They like it much more casual. They like it much more fun. They like it much more, it's more of a social thing. They like going and hanging out with people. They like having little groups so that they can get together and have some food, throw in a little Bible so that it feels spiritual, have activities, it's more of a social function. And look, if you need church for a social reason, by all means, then I guess, you can turn your church into a social club and y'all have a great time and everyone will be happy. For me, I never have, never wanted, I don't need, don't want, don't desire the church to provide me any social function. I don't need I don't need a church that, you can make a friend. I don't need that. I never wanted that, never needed that, didn't care for that. Look, I don't need you to help me make friends and give me an ice cream social so I can sit around talking about things that maybe I'm interested in, maybe I'm not interested, with very little theological conversation even happening. I don't care about any of that. Now, some people love that. So if you love that, that's okay. But to me, the people love that. And then guess what happens? Then when push comes to shove and some people are asked some basic theological questions, they can't answer it because they've been going to church, stuffing their face with food, potlucks, activities, and not doing anything actually of significance. But they all feel super spiritual because, they're all decent people. Now, that's great if that's what you want, but just don't sit there and pretend that the church is doing something phenomenal or doing anything spiritual. You've built a great social club and everyone has fun and everyone's nice to each other. They know each other and you feel a sense of community. You feel a sense of friendship. Okay, great. Then that's great. But when these studies come out saying the church is theologically, biblically illiterate, the church doesn't even have a biblical worldview, and the church is a mess, don't sit there and go, what's happening? No, your church is what's happening. So I think a lot of people don't want a church that's going, we're going to go in, we're going to teach, we're going to teach, we're going to teach. Oh, there's always some that do, but I'm saying the majority, I don't think really want that. But if the problem is so bad that we just heard a report on Christian radio that's like, hey, the solution, it's not inside the church. The solution to this is outside the church. Really? Okay. So we got to fix. So, and if you think, and I've raised this question throughout most of my Christian life, because the first time I heard parachurch, I'm like, what in the world is that? And they're like, oh, that's a ministry. That's a ministry that's operating outside of a church. It's not under the control of a church. It's outside of the church. And I'm like, so it's like this is what happens. There's these individuals, they'll notice all these shortcomings within the church. The church is failing to do this. The church is failing to do this. The church is falling short doing this. And there's all these problems and the church is not fixing it. So then parachurch ministries come along to try to address the issues. And it's like, this parachurch ministry is here to help. Now, they will always say they're supplementing the church. They're assisting the church. But again, if the church was doing its job, you wouldn't need parachurch ministries coming along to help. Now, I know churches tend to make an excuse. Well, you can't really do this and you can't really do that and you can't and you can't and you can't and you can't. I get so tired of that. You can't really teach that. You can't do that's too deep. You'll lose people. Well, maybe you'll lose people, but at some point there's got to be a church somewhere that says we're going to go all in and this is what we're going to do. But I think churches try to be all things to all people so that they can continue to bring in the money to keep the whole mechanism operating. And that's the thing. When you need money to keep it operating, then you got to keep developing things that bring in people so that you continue to keep the money to keep the things operating. It becomes this just ridiculous cycle. It's like just running on a hamster wheel, running in circles. And the whole reason you're running is just to keep the institution operating. So is the solution, I'll ask it this way. If Christians at large in the United States of America are biblically, theologically illiterate and do not possess a biblical worldview, These are even Christians who attend church on a regular basis. If Christians who attend church on a regular basis need something outside of the church to help them biblically, theologically, and help them develop a Christian worldview, if that's the case, does that not then argue against even the existence of many local churches? Because the local churches, does that not demonstrate that they're not doing their job? I think it demonstrates they're not doing their job, and that's why all these other things exist. You can tell me what you think. You can email me, newsif@yahoo.com. That's newsif@yahoo.com. That's newsif@yahoo.com. Now, according to the broadcasting dashboard that I have available to me, you know how many people are currently listening to me? 0. Now, I believe the information is not correct. I don't believe the information is correct. Someone has to be listening to me. But even if no one is listening to me, these things still need to be said. Even if no one ever hears these words, they still need to be said. Because I think a lot of people need to question, hey, where am I really getting fed spiritually? Who's discipling me? Who's challenging me? Where am I learning? And then where is all of my focus, time, energy, money going to? Well, if your attendance and your focus and your money is going to things that are not actually doing the feeding and developing you spiritually, at some point you got to kind of scratch your head and go, what am I doing? I don't have all the answers, but I just found it fascinating that they acknowledge all the problems in the church and the solution isn't inside the church. And it's like, okay, so hey, you go to church, but you've got to fix all the problem yourself outside of it. Then I don't understand that. I don't understand it. All right. You can email me newsif@yahoo.com. That's newsif@yahoo.com. Thank you for tuning into this kind of brief episode, but I wanted to follow up on our report on that very interview. We reported on that interview that they played clips from. We had the kind of the printed version of it. We didn't have the audio or the video, but you probably still can find all of that at the Christian Post if you so desire. All right. Thank you for listening. Everyone have a great day. God bless.